It's funny how life can change in an instant, isn't it? One minute, everything seems fine, and then the next, you're faced with a reality you never saw coming. That's what happened to me one Friday evening, when I found out something that would change the course of my life forever. My name's Sarah. I'm 32, and up until that moment, I had been living a pretty typical life. I was married to Tom, a guy I thought I could trust with my whole heart. We were together for almost a decade, had a house, a dog, and shared dreams of the future. We'd been through the ups and downs of life together, or so I thought. But as it turns out, there were things I didn't know, things he'd kept hidden from me for far too long. It started with a text. It was late, about 11 p.m., when my phone buzzed. Tom had left his phone on the kitchen counter while he was taking a shower, and I'd noticed that there was a new notification from someone named Lena. I didn't think much of it at first. I mean, we had been married for years. I trusted him. But as I went back into the living room, something caught my eye. It wasn't just a message. It was a series of messages that made me feel something cold settle in my stomach. I took a deep breath, then opened his phone. The first message was harmless enough. Something about a work meeting they'd both attended. But the next one? That's when I started feeling like I was in a nightmare. The conversation was flirtatious, full of inside jokes and private mentions of things I didn't know about. I scrolled up, heart pounding, and then there it was, a photo of Tom, smiling with Lena's arm wrapped around him. They looked like they were having the time of their lives. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just a coworker. This wasn't just a friendly interaction. This was something deeper, something secret, something that didn't involve me. I felt my hands shake as I put the phone back on the counter. Tom was in the shower, oblivious to what I had just uncovered. My mind was racing, my thoughts spinning out of control. Why didn't I see this coming? Had I been so caught up in my own world that I missed all the signs? The late nights at work? The strange little excuses? The secretive nature of his phone? I started to feel like a fool. But then I thought about the fact that I had a choice. I could confront him now. I could let him explain, or I could wait. But I knew that once I confronted him, things would never be the same. Was I ready for that? Was I ready to face the truth? Whatever it might be? Before I could even make a decision, I heard the shower turn off. My heart jumped in my chest, and I felt a wave of panic sweep over me. There was no going back now. It was time to find out just how deep this betrayal went. As I stood there, frozen, I thought about everything we'd built together. How did it all come to this? How could the man I loved so deeply do something like this? And yet, there I was, about to confront him with everything I had just uncovered. But what did I even want from him? What answers could he possibly give that would make this all okay again? I wasn't sure if I was looking for closure, revenge, or just some kind of explanation. All I knew was that my world had just been shattered, and I needed to know the truth. Tom came out of the bathroom, toweling off his hair, completely unaware of the storm brewing in the other room. I watched him for a moment, trying to figure out how to even begin. How could I say what I needed to say without it sounding like an accusation? Without it turning into something I couldn't control? "Hey, you okay?" he asked, walking into the living room, his voice casual. I could tell he hadn't noticed the tension in the air. He didn't see it. He didn't feel it. "Tom," I started, my voice quieter than I wanted it to be. "We need to talk." He paused, his expression shifting a bit. He must have sensed something wasn't right because he sat down beside me, his tone suddenly more serious. "What's going on?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I wanted to be calm. I didn't want to lash out. But the hurt was there. The betrayal was there. And it was impossible to ignore. I saw your messages," I said, my voice cracking a little. "With Lena." His face went pale. I watched his eyes flicker, his expression shifting from confusion to panic in the span of a second. I didn't give him the chance to say anything. I was already going through 1,000 emotions, and all I could do was keep talking. "How long has this been going on, Tom?" I demanded, my hands trembling as I clutched the edge of the couch. "How long have you been hiding this from me?" I expected him to deny it, to try and explain, but instead he looked down at his hands. He looked guilty. That was the first time in all the years I'd known him that I saw that look. It hit me harder than I'd imagined. It felt like someone had just pulled the rug out from under me. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he finally said, his voice low. "I never meant for you to find out like this." I could feel my chest tightening, my mind spinning. Was this supposed to make me feel better? Was an apology supposed to fix everything? "Never meant to get caught, you mean?" I snapped, unable to stop myself. The anger was rising now, too. "How long, Tom? How long have you been seeing her?" He didn't look at me. His eyes were focused on the floor like he was trying to avoid my gaze. "It started a few months ago," he said, his voice so quiet I almost didn't hear him. "We were just talking at first, but then it became more. It shouldn't have happened, I know that, but it did. A few months ago." That hit me like a ton of bricks. A few months. How many times had he told me he was working late or busy with clients? How many times had I trusted him only for him to be with her? The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. I didn't know what to say anymore. I was so angry, but also hurt. So much hurt. It felt like someone had pulled a mask off of him, and underneath was someone I didn't even recognize. "You need to leave," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I can't even look at you right now." Tom stared at me, his face pale. "Sarah, please, don't do this. Let's talk. We can work through this." I shook my head, standing up. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't sit there and pretend everything was okay when I knew it wasn't. Not after everything he'd done. "I don't think we can fix this, Tom," I said, my voice steady but breaking inside. "You made a choice, and now I have to make mine." I felt like I was in a daze, like everything was moving in slow motion. But somehow, the words had come out of my mouth and they hung in the air like a final verdict. I didn't even know what came next. I didn't know how to pick up the pieces, but I knew I had to start somewhere. As Tom sat there staring at me with a mixture of regret and helplessness, I realized that it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about me. I needed to figure out who I was without him, who I could be without the person I thought I knew, and I needed to do it alone. I grabbed my phone, ready to leave. I wasn't sure where I was going or what I was going to do, but I couldn't stay there. Not with him, not with the weight of the lies hanging over me. "I'm sorry," he called after me, but I didn't stop. The door slammed behind me, and suddenly I was standing outside in the cold night air, wondering what came next. I didn't know where I was going when I left the house. My mind was a blur. My heart felt like it was shattering with every step I took. I didn't have a plan. I just needed to get away, to breathe, to let the weight of everything that had happened sink in. I ended up at the park, a quiet, empty place that had always been my little escape when life got too overwhelming. The city lights twinkled in the distance, but everything felt distant now, like I was in a different world entirely. I sat down on a bench, trying to steady my breathing. My hands were still shaking, my thoughts racing. Was this really happening? Was my marriage really falling apart over something I never saw coming? How could Tom do this? How could he lie to me for so long, right to my face? I pulled my phone out, staring at the screen for a moment. I didn't want to talk to anyone, but I knew I couldn't keep it all bottled up inside. So I sent a message to Emma, my best friend. She was the one person I could always count on to just listen. No judgment, no pressure. "I need to talk, I don't know what to do." The phone buzzed almost immediately. Emma was always quick to respond, especially when she could tell something was wrong. "What happened? Where are you?" I didn't have the energy to explain everything, so I kept it simple. "I'm at the park. Tom, he's been seeing someone else." There was a long pause, then another message from Emma. "Oh my God, are you okay? Do you want me to come get you?" I sighed, not sure what I wanted or needed, but I was grateful for her offer. "No, I'm fine. Just need some time to think." I could hear the concern in Emma's voice even through the phone, but I needed the space. I needed to process everything by myself, to understand why I felt so lost, why it felt like my whole world was crumbling. I sat there for what felt like hours, the cool breeze brushing against my skin. My thoughts wandered to the good times, the happy memories of Tom and me before all of this. We had built a life together. We had talked about the future, about getting older, about starting a family. Where did those conversations go? How did we get from there to this place of betrayal and heartache? I thought back to the messages I had seen, the way Lena had spoken to him, so casually, so intimately. It was clear that it wasn't just an affair, it was something he had allowed to grow. He hadn't just crossed a line, he had built a whole new life, a secret life, without me. I wasn't just blindsided by the affair, I was blindsided by how much he had kept hidden, how little I had known about the man I thought I was married to. But the worst part? The thing I couldn't stop thinking about? How could I have been so blind? How could I have trusted him with everything, only for him to betray that trust in such a deep, hurtful way? It felt like I was living in someone else's life, like the reality I thought I knew was just a fiction. I stood up abruptly, my thoughts too loud, too overwhelming. I couldn't sit there anymore. I needed to do something, anything to get my mind off of this. My phone buzzed again, this time a call from Emma. I didn't feel like talking, but I answered anyway. "Sarah? Are you okay?" Her voice was softer than usual, gentle, like she was afraid of saying the wrong thing. "I don't know, Emma," I said, my voice breaking. "I just don't know anymore." "Listen," she said. "I'm here for you, okay? No matter what. You don't have to figure it out right now. Just take it one step at a time." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I don't know what to do. I'm so angry, but I'm hurt too. I don't even know who he is anymore." "Sarah, you're going through something huge right now," Emma said, "and it's okay to feel lost. It's okay to be angry, but remember, this doesn't define you. You're still you. You're still strong." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to feel strong, to feel like I could handle this, but everything felt so overwhelming. How could I rebuild from this? How could I move forward when the person I had trusted the most had shattered everything? We talked for a while longer, Emma telling me she'd be there when I was ready, no pressure. It was exactly what I needed to hear, even if I didn't fully believe it. I wasn't ready to face the truth yet. I wasn't ready to let go of the idea of the life Tom and I had built together. As I hung up, I felt a little less alone, but still lost. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know if I could forgive Tom, if I even wanted to. But one thing was clear, I wasn't the same person I was when I walked out of that house. I had changed, whether I liked it or not. I walked back to my car, feeling the weight of the night settle on my shoulders. Tomorrow was going to be another hard day, but I had to face it. One step at a time. The next few days felt like a blur. I barely slept and barely ate. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was Tom's face, pale with guilt, his words echoing in my mind. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I never meant for you to find out like this." His apology felt hollow. Maybe it was because I didn't believe it, or maybe it didn't matter anymore. The damage was done. I spent most of the weekend in a daze trying to distract myself, but it was impossible to avoid the reality of what had happened. It wasn't just the affair. It was the years of lies, the secrets, the part of Tom I never even knew existed. I had trusted him fully, completely, and now I was left wondering if I'd ever truly known him at all. I didn't hear from him. I didn't want to, honestly. What was there to say? I couldn't even bring myself to open his messages. I didn't want to hear his excuses. I didn't want to hear him tell me how sorry he was. The truth was, the apology meant nothing if the actions didn't change. And what could change now? We couldn't unknow the hurt that was sitting between us. Like an elephant in the room. By Sunday night, I'd decided to stay with Emma. I couldn't be alone. Not yet. Not with everything swirling inside me. Emma didn't ask questions when I showed up at her doorstep with nothing but a bag of clothes and a broken heart. She just opened the door, hugged me, and let me in. It was exactly what I needed. She'd made me dinner, comfort food, the kind you eat when everything feels like it's falling apart. We sat at her small kitchen table, the two of us eating in silence for a while, until finally Emma spoke. "You know, you don't have to make any decisions right now," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "You don't owe Tom anything, and you don't owe yourself any answers. Just take some time. You deserve that." I looked at her, trying to wrap my mind around what she was saying. But how do I move on from this? How do I even start to pick up the pieces? Emma shrugged, a sad smile on her face. "I wish I had an easy answer for you, but I can tell you this, you don't need to figure everything out today. You don't need to have all the answers right now. Just breathe. Be angry. Be sad. Let yourself feel everything because it's all part of the process." I let her words sink in. I wasn't ready to forgive Tom. I wasn't even close. But maybe Emma was right. Maybe I didn't need to know everything. Maybe I just needed to let myself feel the hurt, the anger, and the confusion before I could even think about moving forward. The days after that conversation were a bit of a blur. I stayed at Emma's, going through the motions of day-to-day life while my mind stayed locked in that whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. But something started to shift. Maybe it was the time away from Tom, or maybe it was Emma's quiet support, but I started to realize that I wasn't as lost as I'd thought. The world hadn't ended because of Tom's betrayal. The world didn't stop turning. I still didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know what my next step was. But I knew I had to figure it out. I couldn't stay in limbo forever, stuck in a place where all I did was think about what Tom had done. The life we'd built together didn't just belong to him. It was mine too, and I had the right to decide what happened next. On Wednesday, I finally texted him. It wasn't about forgiveness or reconciliation. It was about clarity. I needed to hear him say it. I needed him to acknowledge the full weight of what he'd done without any excuses. We need to talk. It felt strange sending that message, like I was opening a door that might never be able to close again. But I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I wasn't afraid of the truth, no matter how ugly it was. I had already seen the worst, and I had survived. I would keep surviving. Tom replied to my message almost immediately. I wasn't sure whether I should feel relieved or anxious about that. Part of me wanted to avoid him completely, but another part of me knew I had to face him if I was ever going to move forward. I couldn't keep running away from the truth, no matter how painful it was. "Where do you want to meet?" was his response, simple and to the point. I sat there staring at my phone for a moment before deciding. We couldn't do this at the house. Too many memories, too much history. I didn't want to have that conversation in a place that still held echoes of our life together. "The coffee shop near my place," I typed back. "I'll be there in an hour." I wasn't sure what I expected, but when I walked into that coffee shop an hour later, I saw Tom sitting at a table in the corner looking smaller than I remembered. He had always been tall, broad-shouldered, a confident man in my eyes. But now, he looked broken. He looked like someone who had lost control of his own life, and that realization hit me harder than I thought it would. He stood up when he saw me, his face softening with a mixture of relief and guilt. He tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. I didn't smile back. I couldn't. Not yet. I wasn't angry anymore. Not in the way I had been, but I wasn't ready to forgive him either. "Sarah," he said, his voice quiet. I'm so sorry for everything." I sat down across from him, folding my arms. The anger had faded, replaced with a deep sense of loss. "I don't want your apology, Tom," I said, my voice steady but cold. "What I want is for you to tell me the truth, the whole truth. No more lies, no more excuses." He nodded, taking a shaky breath before speaking again. "I don't know how to fix this. I don't even know how I let it go this far. Lena, it was a mistake. It wasn't supposed to happen, but I let it happen, and I've hurt you in ways I can't even begin to explain." I listened to him, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to interrupt him. I let him speak, letting the weight of his words sink in. But even as he talked, I felt like I was drifting further away from him. The man sitting across from me wasn't the person I had married. He wasn't the person I thought I knew. He was someone else entirely, someone who had made choices that broke everything we had. "How long, Tom?" I asked, my voice quieter now but still firm. "How long did you think you could keep this from me? How long did you think I wouldn't find out?" He looked down at the table, his hands trembling slightly. "A few months," he whispered. "It started innocently enough, just talking, but then, I don't know. It became something more, and I should have stopped it. I should have stopped everything before it got this far. But I didn't." I sat back in my chair, absorbing his words. It wasn't enough. His regret, his remorse, it wasn't enough to erase the damage he'd caused. I didn't want to hear about how sorry he was anymore. I needed to know why he'd done it, why he hadn't come to me before everything exploded. "I need to know what this was, Tom," I said. "Was this just about Lena, or was it something else? What are you really sorry for? Are you sorry because you got caught, or are you sorry because you hurt me?" He looked up at me then, his eyes full of pain. "I'm sorry because I hurt you," he said, his voice breaking. "I never meant to hurt you. But I did. I can't take that back." There it was, the answer I'd been looking for, the truth. And it wasn't enough to make me forgive him. It wasn't enough to make me forget. But it was a start. "You can't fix this, Tom," I said, my voice steady now, like I was finally getting the words out that had been stuck in my throat for days. "I can't fix this. We can't go back to what we were, and that's the hardest thing to accept. But I need to know, what now? What do you want from me?" He shook his head, almost as if he hadn't expected me to ask that. "I don't want anything from you," he said quietly. "I know I don't deserve anything. I want you to know how deeply sorry I am. I want you to know that I understand if you can't ever forgive me. I understand if you can't ever trust me again." I nodded slowly, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in days, I felt like I was in control of the situation. I had asked the questions I needed answers to, and now I had my clarity. I wasn't going to make any decisions today. I wasn't going to promise anything, not even to myself. But I wasn't going to stay stuck in the past either. It was time to move forward. "Goodbye, Tom," I said quietly, standing up to leave. "I hope you figure things out. But I can't be part of your journey anymore." He didn't try to stop me. He just sat there, watching me walk away. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was walking towards something, not away from its story too. It's time to raise a chair. In the lounge today, we have another fantastic story for you. What my parents did isn't the fundamental question in my mind. What did they fail to do in the lounge today? The money was never the main focus. It has to do with the treachery. In an attempt to settle their debts, my parents sought to take my inheritance. I stole everything they possessed and filed a lawsuit against them. How can I even begin? I just came across a message asking those who severed their familial relations. How did they affect you? And to be honest, what didn't they do is the true question in my situation. In some respects, they tore me to pieces. I'm still working on reassembling my thoughts and perspective. I suppose some backstory is necessary. Growing up, my granddad was my entire universe. Despite his toughness, he was fair. And the only true impairment I ever had was him. When my parents couldn't or wouldn't be bothered, he was the one who took over. Then Dad died when I was 12 years old. I had no idea how it felt to lose him. I sincerely wanted I could have accompanied him, but it seemed like a huge hole was torn straight through me. I realize that seems gloomy, but you may give credit to my parents for that. Early on, they made it very evident that I was more of a bother than a child. Every word, every action, everything served to emphasize that I was only a burden and that they didn't want me. They were unable to escape. The sole daughter of my grandfather was my mother, and every time her name was spoken, I could see this silent disappointment written on his face since I live with him every day. Somehow, my uncles were able to develop a feeling of responsibility as they grew older. Perhaps it's because they were never given stuff so readily, or perhaps they simply understood that they would eventually need to provide for their own families. They worked hard and created lives that weren't centered around Granny. They all lived stable lives, owned their own homes, and constructed their own goods. My mother, however, is another matter. She pursued extravagant attire, weekend parties, and countless excursions to unidentified locations. She later met my father, who shared her obsession with wealth and prestige. They seemed to be custom-made for one another, self-centered and perfectly shallow. As if I were an afterthought, I was abandoned and dragged off to my grandfather's place as they lived it up. For a long time, I told myself that I must have been an accident, that they mistook me for something else since they were preoccupied with their own lives. Or perhaps I served as some sort of contingency when Grandpa died. My mother genuinely showed interest in me for the first time at that point. She became aware of what I stood for, not because she suddenly cared about me. Apart from my uncles, Grandpa left something to only one person. He left me a sizable sum of money and his home. Isn't that logical? Grandpa was aware that my mother would sell everything he had ever worked for without hesitation, merely to make a fast profit. Perhaps he found it difficult to leave her nothing. However, I'm not qualified to pass judgment. I don't know my mother as well as he did his daughter. Along with a nurse who assisted in caring for us in his last days, I was essentially his only friend during his final years. My cousins and uncles. Yes, they would occasionally stop by, but I was the one who was there all the time. I believe that he felt some sort of guilt about my mom's outcome, which is another reason he left me the way he did. The only girl was her. Given that she resembles my grandpa, it's possible that he showered her with attention, leading to her becoming pampered. I wasn't there in her childhood, so I wouldn't know. It's strange to think about, though. My cousins enjoyed these beautiful, carefree childhoods filled of love and attention. Well, I was the one he leaned on, the one who had to provide his emotional support. And somehow this was simply meant to be normal for me. About a month after Grandpa departed, I discovered that my mom was pregnant with my twin sisters. Later, I realized she'd actually intended to abort the pregnancy since, as you can probably assume, kids don't exactly fit in with a party all the time. Lifestyle. But in an unexpected move, Bud had put his foot down. Apparently even he had a limit. So they did the responsible thing and had the twins. Even though it slows them down a lot now, they still manage to delegate as much of the responsibility as they can. To me, naturally. When I reached 18, the conditions of my inheritance came into effect. Grandpa had a sensible idea. Along with the house, I received a trust money. It was meant to serve as a safety net, a fresh start for me. I had no plans to touch the money before I graduated from college. There's no urgency. I will definitely buy it when I am 25. Back then, Grandpa's attorney had reviewed the figures, and I knew exactly what needed to be included, particularly considering that the investments were purportedly designed to increase in value over time. Now that I think about it, I probably should have anticipated it. Due to my parents' early divorce, there were few requests to take out loans from the money to cover household needs. Every time I assumed it would stop when I shut it off. But now they've merely figured out how to be more cunning. After a few years, I discovered that the amount in my trust fund was not what I had anticipated. It should have been growing at a respectable pace, adjusted for inflation, thanks to Grandpa's plan. However, the figures did not add up, and I was obviously not experiencing the significant improvements that had been promised. I made an effort to think of every plausible answer. Perhaps the bank had been wrong. Perhaps the manner the trust was established was a mistake. However, despite my best efforts, nothing made sense. I initially shattered my head trying to think of any possible explanation for this disparity. Was there a mistake by the bank? Was there a tax or other unstated cost that I was unaware of? I felt like I was hitting my head against a wall. At that point, everything made sense. They would ask for money that first time innocuously. They hadn't honored my choice. They had only recently begun to accept it. Gradually. It resembled this gradual, very imperceptible leak that had remained hidden up until this point. But I wanted to know how they did it, because to the best of my knowledge, I was the only person who ought to have been permitted to withdraw the funds. They dismissed me like if I were a mere miscommunication when I challenged them. My sisters asked me dumb things like, I don't care for my sisters and them, and I said that it was required for the home. I ought to have inquired if they were interested in my future. They were so conceited as to accuse me of everything but their own avarice. What, is the worst? For heaven's sake, I continued to believe in them for years. In fact, I think they kept the money that Grandpa left secure. My current feelings are far more complex than anger. I was feeling more than just fury. I doubt any of you will even comprehend the extent of the betrayal. And it doesn't really matter that they are my parents. Because of my religious upbringing, I was always encouraged to respect our parents. Or what? Let me be honest, though. I felt like I was living in poverty outside of my time with Grandpa. They provided me with the necessities of life. Knowing that they had spent my money, however, made it all too much the moment I requested for anything even somewhat good. However, when I requested items, I was told that my requests were excessive and that it was wicked. I'm grateful that my bequest made a monthly mandated allowance possible. That at least affected me. Therefore, I may have decided to leave or even to keep it a secret. However, I wasn't going to overlook it. Particularly in light of what my alleged mother dared to say. She said that if she hadn't made the decision to leave me with Grandpa, I wouldn't even have this fortune, so I should be thankful for her wisdom. Thank you. I was thankful to have been pulled into a world that I was growing to despise every day. At that point, the prospect of a respectable future was the only thing that kept me going. For once, perhaps some steadiness. She was attempting to persuade me that I owed her for it. I knew what I had to do after that. I engaged a lawyer and collected all of their statements and transactions, and I harshly realized that they had stolen more than fragments. They had thrown themselves into it, used the bequest for travel, debt repayment, and other purposes. What should have been my future had been essentially snatched by them. It feels unclean to bring your own parents to court, as if you're violating some unwritten regulation. My lawyer's investigation, however, made it very evident how dishonest they had been. This was not an isolated error. It was a deliberate, gradual bleed, gradually taking out tiny quantities, relying on the idea that I wouldn't ever be able to see it. To be honest, I might not have. Now, however, I was prepared to hold them accountable now. Things were dire once we got the financial documents in front of us. My inheritance had been significantly depleted by them. They had another 2 years to drain even more if I hadn't caught them. A forthright man with years of expertise in estate fraud cases, my lawyer was recommended to me by one of my uncles. He outlined our legal choices. He recommended filing a lawsuit for violation of fiduciary responsibility, but I'm not sure what any of this implies. I trusted the guy, but I didn't find out what it meant. He appeared to be knowledgeable. He claimed I had a strong case since I had sufficient evidence of their financial difficulties and poor management. It was strange to hear these formal terminology applied to individuals who were meant to be family. I was prepared to go all the way, though. When my parents learned of my plans, that was the true tipping point. They went utterly crazy, but not because they were sorry or truly ashamed. It was sheer terror. They didn't think I would get this far. All of a sudden, they were rushing to avoid any serious repercussions. Since I wasn't returning their calls or other family members' requests for us to get together, my mom even attempted to send me a half-baked apology via chat. She claimed they were only trying to make ends meet and had always intended to reimburse me. Yes, of course. I didn't purchase it back then, and I still don't. This woman came to my school to cause a commotion after that failed. She began to scream and plead as soon as she spotted me. I was embarrassed to a degree I had never experienced in my life. The fact that I have no idea how she discovered my schedule still confuses me. She may have stalked me. I'm not sure. However, you should all be thankful for your parents because you are so low. I read several of your tales before writing mine, and I wish I had the families that others complained about. If you had nice parents, that is. However, their attempt to include my sisters in it was what truly turned the corner. The only relatives I still genuinely cared about. They accused me of being avaricious and self-centered, and they said that I was denying the girls a shot at a secure future. Naturally, my sisters were too little to comprehend any of it. This was simply another one of my parents' deceitful tactics, a dishonest attempt to avoid taking responsibility for their actions, even if it meant involving their own kids. However, I maintained a polite exterior while gathering all the data and supporting documentation I could, as my lawyer and I delved more into our family's past. After ignoring it for too long, I started to see a trend. Long before my sisters were born, my parents were in debt. They carelessly accrued expenses. I had no future plans and was living above their means. They were already having serious financial difficulties when Grandpa went away. To them, my inheritance was more than just an emergency money. Their only option was to do so. However, I wasn't going to allow them to use my memories or my grandfather's as a pawn. My attorney filed a lawsuit alleging financial embezzlement and breach of fiduciary responsibility. Both financially and emotionally, it was a difficult choice. However, I was quite entitled to protect what my grandfather had left me, even if it meant going to court with my own parents. Of course, the case was difficult. My parents made every effort to discredit me by saying that I had misinterpreted the trust's conditions. After that, I was clueless about how money was handled. The figures, however, provided the evidence. They flagrantly misappropriated every cash, every piece of proof, and every illegal transaction. Their supply of falsehoods to protect themselves ran exhausted. I wish I could say that I felt sorry in some way. But to be honest, whatever remorse I might have had vanished after witnessing how coldly they had taken advantage of me. The ultimate decision was in my favor after months of back and forth in court. The court issued a clear and stern ruling, requiring them to return a sizable amount of the bequest while noting the overwhelming evidence of their poor management. They were exhausted. Furthermore, the decision denied him any additional authority over my inheritance. I will always remember the expression on their faces as they realized they had lost all they had just siphoned off. After the trial, they naturally attempted to turn the tables on me by accusing me of being the cause of their financial difficulties and blaming me for it. However, I believe they secretly realized that was their downfall. Their debt wasn't caused by me. Not only did I not make them live above their means, but I also did not push them to take from their own kid. My inheritance was not the only thing I received back. I was at last at peace. I didn't have to put up with the manipulation and falsehoods and continue acting like we were a family. Now that everything was done, I could finally start living the life my grandfather had always desired for me, following the decision. It wouldn't finish that way, even though you'd think everything would have calmed down nicely. My parents were on the verge of giving up. To everybody who would listen, they said that I had betrayed the family and portrayed me as a vicious young man who had betrayed them. I was solely to blame for my avarice. They reported that I had ejected them, which I did, but not for the reasons they claimed, to the neighbors, our family, and even the few remaining old acquaintances. This was obviously a ploy to gain sympathy from all of these men and make a lot of money. I wanted them out because I felt I wasn't secure with them around, not only to exact retribution. Naturally, my sisters were listed as my next of kin. Given all that was going on, I feared that they might become so desperate that they would kill me in order to obtain the money they had received from their friends and relatives. Fundraising was fueled by sympathy. Somewhere nearby, they were able to rent a respectable but little flat. To be honest, I'm not interested in the gossip my uncle used to tell me. I just cared that they were no longer able to conceal the gleaming, picture-perfect image they had laboriously created while virtually ignoring me. I had no idea what they did. People started phoning me to complain or to find out what had occurred, so perhaps they rapidly spent the money that others had paid them for their victim act. Supporting me, I was no longer the bad guy. They quickly obtained my new number and began phoning me once more, pleading for money and even snatching my scissors out of my house without warning. I had to send them back when they realized I was there to solicit money, and I ultimately left the house for a while to confuse them. If they push me that far, I'm thinking about selling the house and moving out, although I wouldn't want to do that. I'm still hoping for a feeling of justice. The sense of fulfillment that individuals talk about after exacting retribution isn't really present. Later on, I decided to let my sisters visit me whenever they could, but my mother didn't agree. She's probably out there living her version of events, and I'm aware that I've probably lost my sisters as well. I'm hoping they'll still find their way to me when they're old enough and won't be irreparably poisoned. Ultimately, I discovered that some individuals are just unchangeable. As people age or gain wisdom, they don't grow better. They simply become more of their current selves. That's also the case with my parents. I've come to terms with my choice now. As I mentioned, I don't communicate with my parents, and I doubt I ever will. I don't want to include my sisters in this mess since they are too little to comprehend everything that has transpired. Maybe we'll speak when they're older. I'm confident they'll want to hear my version of events. Or perhaps they will be upset with me because they believe I was the one who broke the family up. But ultimately, I hope they'll get it. Perhaps they will realize that someone had to stop it. And me? I'll continue on my way. I'm left feeling good about myself, at least by myself. Let's not even talk about guilt trips. Do you not give a damn about your sisters? As if it were some sort of quick money scam, they ask while they're busy squandering your wealth on themselves. To make matters worse, they had the gall to behave as though you owed them money for their forethought in leaving you with your grandfather. But when you went up when they were drowning in their own debt and falsehoods, you didn't just roll over like a nice old doormat. You were at last free to lead the life that your grandfather had always dreamed of. Do you have a comparable tale? Tell us in the comments section below. We also appreciate you coming to the lounge today. To ensure you don't miss our next video, please press the notification bell, like, and subscribe. Till the next occasion. Additionally, kindly return your chair to its original location.